Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be talking about the best games on the Game Boy. All of these games are ones that I own, and they're also just the black and white Game Boy games. There will be a separate list for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance at some point. Up first is Dr. Mario. This is a really fun puzzle game. It's pretty simple. You're just trying to line up 4 colors in a row, and you're trying to get rid of all the little viruses in this. They come in gray, white, and black, and it's all pretty easy to deal with. I did have a few problems when I was playing this on my Game Boy Pocket, but when I tried it out with this one, it just worked out a lot better. Playing it on an emulator or on a Super Game Boy really does fix any of the issues you might have with seeing the white or the gray little viruses. Tetris was a pack-in game for the Game Boy, and it has a really amazing story of just how the game came to the US. And also how it came to Nintendo as well. There's so much that goes into this game that it's just an amazing story on its own. The gameplay is very simple. You're just trying to line up rows of blocks, and as you line them up, the blocks disappear. It's a pretty simple game, but it can be a ton of fun to play. The game gets faster as you go along, and it's also one of those games that shows the Game Boy isn't just for kids, it's pretty much for everyone. Having this as a pack-in game was really a great choice, because it showed, this isn't just another Mario thing. This can be used for pretty much anybody, anywhere, at any time. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person that likes Yoshi's Cookie. It is a pretty simple puzzle game, and it's honestly a ton of fun to play. It's incredibly simple, but there's a lot going on here. It's a pretty fun game to go through. You are just trying to line up rows of different cookies. They can be in rows of 2, 3, 4, or however long the rows are. It's simple, it's fun, and it does get harder as the game goes along. It's one of those games that I just really enjoy sitting back and playing. Yoshi's Cookie is a ton of fun. This is probably going to sound crazy, but this version of Blades of Steel is the best version. It is much better than the NES. The fact that it just has cutscenes, both for scoring and when you get into fights, it's awesome. I was not expecting to see something like this on the Game Boy, and I wasn't expecting to tell anyone that the Game Boy version of Blades of Steel is better than the NES version. It's shocking how good this is. Everything from the NES version transferred to the Game Boy. So you still have the same teams, you have the same options of play. It's great. The fights are still there, the scoring is still there. It added in cutscenes that were not in the NES game. I don't know what happened, but this ended up being much better than the NES version. This is my favorite version of Contra. It's not the only Contra game that is on the Game Boy. There is another one that's just a port of Alien Wars. But Operation C is awesome. It's much better than Super C was, and yeah, I just really enjoy this game quite a bit. Konami put out a whole bunch of really amazing games on both the NES and on the Super Nintendo, but their Game Boy games aren't talked about as much. They are just as good, if not better, than many of the console ports. Just like on the NES and on the Super Nintendo, you play as just some random guy who's killing everything with a machine gun. It is a great game. This was such fun to play. I really enjoyed it. It's one of my favorite versions, if not my favorite version of Contra. Bubble Bobble is a fun little arcade game. Where this one kind of stands out from the console ports is the fact that there's a little bit more scrolling that goes into it. They tried to get as much as they could of the game on one screen, but yeah, you just have to kind of move around quite a bit on this one. It's a ton of fun to play, just like the console versions of it, There's something else that I really enjoy that I just can't quite put my finger on. I think it's the fact that I could take this anywhere with my Game Boy. That has to be it, because I can't really think of anything else. Like with the console and the arcade ports, there are some cheap deaths, but it's not really that big of a deal. It's just fun to run around as your little dragon guy, putting weird monsters into bubbles. You probably weren't expecting to see a fighting game on here, but this version of Mortal Kombat 2 is really good. Looking at all of the other versions of Mortal Kombat, at least 1 through 4 that I've seen on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, this is the best one out of the bunch. It controls well, the graphics are fairly good for the Game Boy, and I think they did a pretty good job of bringing the arcade action to the handheld. It isn't going to be a great port, but it's much better than what you would expect on the Game Boy, especially if you tried to play the first Mortal Kombat on Game Boy or attempted to play Mortal Kombat 3. Those are pretty terrible, but Mortal Kombat 2 is a really fun game, and it's a great version of Mortal Kombat 2. Pokemon Yellow is my favorite version of Pokemon, at least the first generation version of Pokemon. It's a lot of fun to see what they had done to it, the changes that they've made, and just how you can walk around with a little Pikachu. It's pretty awesome. The selection of Pokemon that you can collect is pretty good. I still like Blue a little bit better, but it has all the Pokemon from Red that I also like. So Yellow really is the one that I find the most enjoyable to go back and play. The Pokemon franchise is just a really great starter RPG that I would recommend to anyone who wants to get into the genre. The Ninja Turtle games on the Game Boy are all awesome. The first one kind of looks a little bit like a Tiger Electronics game or a souped-up one, but with 2 here, it's a lot better. They are completely different from their console or even the arcade counterparts, and they're just a ton of fun to go through and play. They're all fairly simple, but I think the second one is the best. While I would have preferred a port of the arcade game, this is still a pretty solid game that comes about as close to being a beat-em-up as the Game Boy could do at the time. It's a pretty awesome game, and it looks really good for the Game Boy as well. At the time of its release, Metroid II was a sequel to the NES game. It's pretty awesome. It's just like the NES game in a lot of ways. You basically are trapped in a maze running around killing monsters and trying to wipe out all the Metroids on the planet. However, this is where you come across the baby Metroid that decides that Samus is its mother. Yeah, this whole series is pretty weird, but it is a ton of fun to play. Back in the 90s and also in the late 80s, these games made you feel like you were just a rat in a maze, running around with no map, trying to figure out just what the hell is going on, collecting a bunch of different weapons, backtracking, trying to figure out all the secrets. It is a ton of fun to go through these, but it can be very frustrating, especially since you don't have a lot of the quality of life things that you would have in the later series. Well, I feel that the Harvest Moon series has kind of been passed up by many of its clones and games that were inspired by it. This version is a pretty solid version of Harvest Moon. It does lack some of the things that the Super Nintendo game had, like being able to explore the town, but it still has quite a bit of fun in it, especially just relaxing, tending your farm, and helping out your animals. It's a fun game, even if it has kind of been passed up by some of the other games in the series, and also by Stardew Valley. Super Mario Land 2 improves on the first game in every way. It's also the game that introduces Wario to all of us. And it tells us that Mario has a private island and his own castle, so clearly his plumbing business is just a front for his other illicit activities. I don't know, making Luigi cook meth or something like that. In this game, you just have to stop Wario. That's pretty much it. He's taken over your private island, he's taken over your castle, and you have to collect 6 coins in order to defeat him. And these are the big, real coins, so they matter an awful lot, as opposed to the other ones where you just collect them for, lottery machines and other stuff. It is kind of weird that Mario has a bunch of gambling things here, but maybe that's how he got all of his money for his private island and also his castle. In Wario Land, you play as Wario. Isn't that crazy? He's got a bunch of different power-ups, so instead of just stomping on enemies, he's got his little dash attack, which is pretty awesome. He also has different hats that he collects along the way, like a bull hat and also a cool little dragon hat. I like the dragon hat way more than I probably should, just because it's a flamethrower. So in this one, you are jealous of Mario, since he didn't let you steal his castle from Super Mario Land 2, and you are trying to collect a whole bunch of treasures so that you can afford an island of your own, because Mario's a dick and won't let you steal from him. I guess. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Anyway, you're the evil guy, and you're trying to do evil stuff. It's actually really fun. So right off the bat, yes, I know that Final Fantasy Legend 2 is actually a saga game, but I don't care. It's awesome. I absolutely love this game. It was the second Final Fantasy game I ever played. A friend of mine had this, I borrowed it from him, and I got way farther into it than he ever did, which was just amazing for me at the time. In Final Fantasy Legend 2, you have to collect a bunch of pieces of Magi. There's 78 of them in total, and they create a little statue of a goddess, who at the very end of the game helps you fight off basically automated security. It's kind of fun. It's a weird game, but it is just a lot of fun to play. Instead of recruiting a bunch of class characters like mages or fighters or thieves, you just build your party off of humans, mutants, robots, or monsters. The monsters are kind of stupid, to be perfectly honest, because they eat meat and then mutate into different monsters, which kind of doesn't help you out as much as it probably should. In the end game, you do get stronger monsters, but I don't really like it that much. The robots' health points are all based on how many guns they're carrying, so that's pretty awesome. And yeah, it's a really fun game, but you do have to worry about the durability of your weapons, which can be a little annoying at times. Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is one of the best retro games out there. It's also probably the best game on the original Game Boy. I've got many memories of playing this game while on car trips or traveling to wrestling meets. This is one of the games that I borrowed from a friend before I ended up getting it later on. It was one of those games that I enjoyed trying to figure everything out. It's just a lot of fun to play. It has spectacular graphics for the Game Boy. There's a ton of options for how you want to play this game. And just being able to swap out both the sword and the shield was just really awesome. This game is great. It's absolutely great. If you don't get a chance to play it on the original Game Boy, definitely check out the remake on the Switch. Link's Awakening is one of the best Zelda games out there. There are a ton of other really great games on the Game Boy, but these 15 I think are the best on the system. It really was one of Nintendo's more overlooked systems. It's got a spectacular library, and I'm glad that they're bringing some of those games to the Switch. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.